Hey guys, tonight we're going to ease into something exquisitely boring, soothing really, the gentle art of folding togas in ancient Rome. Picture this, the warm glow of oil lamps flickering on stone walls, a faint smell of wool and olives in the air, and a dignified Roman man standing motionless while his household slave attempts for the 15th time to get that one pleat just right. This isn't exactly gladiator-level drama. You're not in the Colosseum. You're in a linen-scented side room, trying not to nod off while someone wraps you in what amounts to a very large napkin. You probably won't survive this, at least not without yawning. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is as you drift off tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through a dusty Roman morning, the kind where the light scrapes sideways across the forum, and you hear the low clop of sandals on paving stones. You're here not for battle, not for empire, but for the toga, or rather for how it began. Not as some grand symbol of Roman pride, but as something surprisingly practical. Picture early Roman shepherds, trudging through the chilly hills of Latium, clutching simple wool cloaks around their shoulders. These were called tegemen, a name that basically means covering. It wasn't fancy, it was warm. Eventually, those rough wool wraps started getting draped over tunics instead of bare bodies. That's right, you're already layering. Fashion, after all, begins when someone gets cold and decides to make it look intentional. Over time, the tegemen became the toga. It wasn't born in a Senate speech or a Caesar's closet. It just sort of evolved. And the earliest toga? Heavy, unhemmed, and distinctly scratchy. Think of wrapping a picnic blanket around your torso and declaring yourself ready for civic life. That was the Roman aesthetic. Historians still argue whether the toga emerged independently or was inspired by Etruscan garments worn centuries earlier. Some even claim it was a reinterpretation of Greek himachaions. But the truth, folded into history like wool on wool, is probably a little of both. Now imagine standing in a cramped mud brick house near the Tiber River around 600 BCE. You're clutching your toga, really more of a glorified wool sheet, and trying to make it sit just right. Your wife rolls her eyes, your son laughs, but this is the beginning of something great. You're not just covering up, you're becoming Roman. As centuries pass, the toga transforms from a shepherd's shawl into a ceremonial badge of Roman identity. Everyone from senators to poets starts wearing it. But here's the catch. It wasn't exactly comfortable. Romans didn't wear togas for convenience. They wore them to show that they could wear them, that they had the wealth and status to afford not needing to do anything physical while swaddled in 12 to 20 feet of wool. Fringe fact? Some historians believe the earliest togas were made without any dye or ornamentation, just plain wool. No purple stripes, no embroidery, nothing that said, "Look at me," beyond the simple fact that you were wearing it. Because early Roman culture prized austerity over flair. At least until emperors came along with their gold-threaded versions. Then, well, subtlety took a bit of a vacation. You walk through the early Republic now, about 500 BCE. Men gather in the forum, arguing over grain prices, pointing with gestures that are made 10 times more dramatic by their flowing togas. That's another secret benefit. Togas are great for gesturing. Want to make a point? Sweep your arm, let the fabric flutter. Even Cicero would have had more flair wrapped in 15 pounds of wool. Meanwhile, the toga also becomes an unofficial national uniform. No other people wear it. It's uniquely Roman. Barbarians in pants? Not invited to this toga party. Greeks in chitons? Too soft. Only the citizen male of Rome could wrap himself in this peculiar, fussy blanket and claim it as cultural armor. But there's another reality under the surface.
slaves, and tailors, because let's be honest, nobody's folding that thing alone. Roman men of stature had vestatores, basically dressing assistants. You weren't really powerful unless someone else was fixing your folds for you while you stood there pretending to ponder philosophy. By 200 BCE, you start seeing variants. Toga praetexta, with a purple stripe for magistrates. Toga candida, bleached within an inch of its life for political candidates. Yes, that's where we get the word candidate, because you literally had to be dressed in blinding white to run for office. It's like a Roman version of wearing a sparkly sash. A lesser-known tidbit, Romans sometimes rubbed chalk into their toga candida to make it even whiter. The chalk would flake off as they walked through the forum, leaving a faint trail of ambition in their wake. As the Republic grows, so does the symbolism of the toga. It becomes law. Only freeborn Roman men can wear one. Enslaved individuals, foreigners, women, all forbidden from wrapping themselves in this stiff, cumbersome pride parade. Though women had their own draped garments like the stola, the toga remained a male-only affair. Well, mostly. Here's the juicy bit. Women accused of adultery were sometimes forced to wear togas as a mark of shame. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or literal. Did they really get wrapped up like the men they were judged for enticing, or was it just a cruel rhetorical jab? Either way, not exactly fashion-forward. You ease now into the reign of Augustus, around the turn of the millennium. He launches a moral crusade to bring back old Roman virtues, and part of that means mandatory toga time. If you're going to the forum or court, you're wearing a toga, no excuses. Tailors rejoiced. Sheep? Less so. Now imagine the toga being used as political propaganda. Augustus wants Romans to behave better, and he decides nothing says discipline like 20 pounds of fabric folded just so. There's even a public fund to help the poor afford one, because civic dress is now civic duty. You're wrapped not in wool, but ideology. Funny thing? The more formal the toga gets, the more miserable it becomes. By the height of the empire, togas are larger, heavier, and less practical than ever. A symbol of virtue, yes, but also a daily wrestling match with wool and gravity. And yet, it endures. Through republic and empire, assassinations and invasions, the toga remains. Always wool, always white, or close to it, always a little too much. By now, you've walked centuries draped in cloth. You've watched the toga go from a rustic poncho to a rigidly structured garment worn only on the most official days. You feel the layers weigh on you, not just the wool, but the meanings. Citizenship, class, masculinity, duty. A toga is never just a toga. It's a declaration wrapped around your body. And sometimes it's an accident waiting to happen. But we'll get to that. For now, you sit back down on your stone bench, the pleats of your imaginary toga pooling around your ankles, someone's lighting another oil lamp, the forum's shadows are growing longer, and we're just getting started.
You're standing still now, a bit itchy, wrapped in the coarsest wool that nature ever dared to provide, and you're starting to wonder, who thought this was a good idea for a Mediterranean climate? Because you're sweating. Oh, you're sweating a lot. The toga may be Rome's noble garment, but it is not climate-friendly. Wool. Always wool. Not linen, not cotton, not silk. Just wool from sheep that probably had no idea their fleeces would be tortured into political symbolism. You shift your weight slightly, and the fabric doesn't just move, it drags, like a reluctant pet. You feel the sun above the forum beating down on you, and you wonder how Romans ever managed to endure summer wrapped in what's basically a portable oven. But here's the kicker. Wealthy Romans liked it that way. The more wool, the more layers, the more respect. It meant you weren't working in the fields. It meant you had people to help you get dressed. It meant, in essence, that you were important enough to suffer fashionably. Historians still argue whether toga fabric ever got lighter in the summer months. There are hints that lighter weaves existed, but no confirmed summer toga line hit the Roman runways.
It seems Romans just embraced the heat and tried not to pass out mid-speech. Now, close your eyes for a moment and imagine the textures. The toga isn't soft and flowy like a modern bedsheet. It's rough. Think burlap, but less forgiving. You wrap it around yourself, tugging it just so over the left shoulder, letting it fall in bulky folds to the ground. The fabric creaks faintly when you move. And the smell? A little sheepish, if we're being honest. Washing wool wasn't exactly easy in ancient Rome. You'll learn more about that soon, but suffice it to say, ammonia was involved. But before we get there, let's talk about the sheer size of this thing. By the time of the late Republic, the average toga could measure up to 20 feet long and around 6 feet wide. That's not a garment, it's a small room. You don't put it on so much as enter it. It's wrapped, folded, draped, and redraped until it hangs just right. And if it doesn't, well, hope you weren't planning to sit down today. That's right. Togas are famously bad for sitting. Too much bulk, not enough structure. The folds pool awkwardly, your knees disappear, and if you're unlucky, your left side starts slipping like a badly knotted towel. So you stand, you lean, you pace, because nothing says nobility like avoiding chairs out of sheer textile terror. And in colder weather, the toga becomes your woolen fortress, a heavy one, yes, but warm. You clutch it tight in the wind, the layers insulating your chest, your arms, and, if folded properly, your ego. There's a kind of comfort in that, in a weird, scratchy way, like wearing a blanket that quietly judges you. The wealthy, of course, had higher quality wool, softer, whiter, cleaned more often, sometimes even dyed with rare substances like saffron or indigo, though always subtly, always within the accepted palette of Roman fashion law. Gaudy was for the stage. Real Romans wore dignity, draped and knotted in place. Still, you can't help but imagine some toga-clad senator mid-August, wobbling slightly under the weight of his virtue, sweat trickling down his back as he lectures on grain tariffs. The noble look loses a bit of luster when you're constantly on the verge of fainting from heat exhaustion. A strange fact? Some aristocrats had toga carriers. Not people who helped you wear the toga. No, these were hired aides who followed you around carrying extra folds of it, keeping the shape crisp, adjusting errant pleats as needed. You know you're elite when your clothing has its own assistant.
Now, step outside of the forum with me, into the quiet of a private villa. Marble floors, vines curling along the atrium columns, and somewhere in the shade, a patrician is choosing which toga to wear today. It isn't as simple as the clean one. Each type had its own occasion. The toga virilis, undyed and basic, was the mark of a Roman man reaching adulthood. The toga praetexta, with its purple border, worn by magistrates and high-status children. The toga pulla, dark and somber, reserved for mourning. And yet, despite the many styles, they all shared one truth. They were terrible in the rain. You're walking through a sudden Roman downpour, your wool cloak slowly turning into a sponge. It clings, it stretches, it weighs down. You look like a sad, overdressed jellyfish. There's no umbrella, just prayers to Jupiter for mercy, and perhaps a borrowed hood from a kind friend in a more practical outfit. Which brings us to another wrinkle. Not everyone wore togas all the time. Far from it. In fact, by the 1st century CE, most Romans didn't bother. Slaves didn't wear them. Soldiers wore tunics. Farmers, artisans, merchants, none of them spent their day in 20 feet of wool. The toga was for show, not for life. A Roman man might wear it to court, to a ceremony, or to vote, but then immediately strip it off and switch back into a tunic the moment he was out of public view. You start to realize that the toga is less a garment and more a performance. You don it to enter the public world, to display your citizenship and masculinity and dignity,
And then, like a particularly clingy stage costume, you peel it off as soon as the performance ends. Even the emperor wore it, but rarely. The toga picta, entirely purple and embroidered with gold, was reserved for triumphs and sacred rituals. You couldn't just pop it on to visit the market. Unless, of course, you were Caligula, who reportedly wore women's clothes, armor, and sometimes the imperial toga all at once. Historians still argue whether that was madness, satire, or just aggressive fashion experimentation. Back to you. You're now sitting, awkwardly, on a stone bench at the edge of the forum. You've watched a dozen men in togas walk by, each one carefully arranged, no two quite the same. One man's folds drag a bit low, another's are cinched too tight. A particularly smug senator has his assistant brushing out imaginary lint from the back pleat. Every stitch of wool declares, "I belong here. I am a citizen. I suffer and I sweat, and therefore I am Roman." And you? You shift again. You tug the hem over your foot. A child walks by and giggles at your drooping shoulder fold. You sigh. It's fine. You're learning. Strange, isn't it, that such an uncomfortable, impractical piece of clothing became the symbol of the greatest empire in the ancient world? But maybe that's the point. Anyone can throw on a tunic, but to wear a toga, that takes time, care, support. It's not just a piece of fabric, it's a whole system. And yet, despite its faults, or perhaps because of them, the toga endures. It wraps around the memory of Rome like a ghost of wool, lingering even now in our minds. You'll see it at costume parties and in cartoons, at frat houses and museum displays, but those are just echoes, imitations. The real toga, it was heavy, it was hot, it was glorious. Now close your eyes. Feel the weight again. The slow shift of cloth on skin. The murmur of voices in the forum, the soft brush of sandals on stone, and the sun warming your eyelids. The toga wraps around your imagination, and you, noble and slightly sweaty, begin to fade into the sleepy rhythms of ancient Rome.
You're in a cramped side room now, tucked inside a sprawling Roman domus, and it's dressing time. Not for yourself, you're just watching, which is really the safest job when togas are involved. Before you stands a slightly grumpy Roman nobleman, arms held out, eyes pointed vaguely toward the ceiling in a gesture of heroic indifference. Around him, a small team of household slaves hovers like anxious birds, each one holding a section of wool, quietly praying not to mess up the fold that goes over the left shoulder but under the front drape. This is the reality behind every dignified toga. People, many people, and a whole system of whispered rituals and secret techniques. Because you don't just throw on a toga like a hoodie. You construct it like a tent, a very judgmental tent. This right here is where the magic, or perhaps the madness, happens. The fine art of togatus. Not a sacred priesthood, but it might as well be, given the solemn faces and strategic grunts involved in getting those pleats symmetrical. It starts with the tunic underneath. A basic garment, linen or wool, tied at the waist and designed to disappear beneath the grandeur of the toga. You're not supposed to see the tunic once the toga's in place. If you do, sloppy. Might as well be wearing a bathrobe to the Senate. The toga is lifted and draped over the left shoulder first. Then it's brought behind the back, under the right arm, across the chest again, and finally tossed back over the left shoulder one more time. If you did it right, you now have what's called the sinus, a large fold hanging at the front like a pocket, where you can store scrolls, hands, snacks, if you're daring. Some historians believe the sinus served a practical function in concealing hand gestures or even hiding messages. Others think it was just decorative. Historians still argue whether this drape was purely aesthetic or held deeper meaning. Was it fashion or a form of body language? Either way, it made walking slightly more perilous. The next key feature is the umbo. No, not a dance move, though that would be amazing, but a bunchy knot of fabric pulled from the sinus and tucked in at the waist. It creates a kind of stabilizing twist, a fabric anchor in a world of motion. Too loose, and your toga starts to sag. Too tight, and you can't breathe properly. The sweet spot lies somewhere between cozy restraint and gentle suffocation. And you can't fold this alone. Sure, you could try, but it would look like you got lost in your laundry. Most Romans of status had a vestator, a professional dresser. This person knew the folds, the loops, the subtle tugs. The vestator didn't just help you get dressed. They helped you look like you had your life together, which, in Rome, was at least 60% about fabric confidence. You glance back at the nobleman. He's still standing still, arms slightly lifted, being draped like a living statue. Occasionally, he sighs. Occasionally, someone pokes him gently in the ribs to adjust a wrinkle. He has done this routine 1,000 times. It's ceremony and strategy. The better the fold, the more competent he appears. A toga is public relations in sheep's clothing. Fringe tidbit, some Romans starched their togas. Not joking. Using a primitive form of starch made from plant paste or even ashes, they stiffened the wool to help it hold its shape longer. Imagine walking around in a firm, semi-rigid wool taco shell. That's dedication. You peer closer and realize that not all togas were made equally. The wealthy had their fabric specially loomed. Some hired tailors to pre-sew certain edges or discreetly fold parts ahead of time. This was controversial. Real togas weren't supposed to be sewn, but convenience has always whispered its siren song even to traditionalists. Call it toga light. There's something almost sacred about the silence that accompanies the final fold. A gentle tug here, a smoothing of the umbo there. The vestator steps back, eyes squinted in quiet appraisal. A nod. Done.
Now the nobleman breathes, gently, not too deeply. You don't want to shift anything once it's perfect. He walks to a polished bronze mirror and checks the silhouette. He's ready. Ready to stand in court. Ready to make speeches. Ready to have his photograph taken, if cameras existed. You, meanwhile, are still impressed that he hasn't sneezed and unraveled the whole look. But this man won't be walking alone. Not yet. You follow him through the atrium, down the marble corridor, and out into the street. The folds sway slightly with each step, not too much. A well-wrapped toga doesn't flutter. It glides, like a respectable cloud. You're now on the Via Sacra, and the city is waking up. Market stalls rattle open, bread ovens smoke, and the smell of overripe figs wafts through the air. A group of young Roman men is gathered near the steps of a temple, each one fiddling awkwardly with their togas like teenagers at a graduation ceremony. Their folds are wrong. Their umbos sag. One has his sinus on the wrong side entirely, and they know it. You can see the silent panic in their eyes. The nobleman nods, kindly but judgmentally. Amateurs. That's the thing about togas. They broadcast your competence before you even open your mouth. The way it's folded, the crispness of the lines, the dignity of your drape, all of it speaks louder than any oration. A wrinkled toga could undermine an entire argument. And so there were toga tutors. That's right, teachers who specialized in helping young Roman elites learn how to stand properly in one, how to gesture, how to walk without tangling themselves. You didn't just study rhetoric, you studied presentation. One open debate among scholars whether the ideal toga posture, slightly hunched, left arm still, right arm expressive, was actually natural or the result of generations of etiquette drilling. Did Romans really stand that way, or were they coached into it? You lean toward the latter, watching Run Boy shuffle his feet as he tries to hold his fabric triangle while looking profound. Eventually, you follow them to the Forum, where toga life plays out in full. This is the stage. This is where the folds matter. And the elite have their own little corners, shady spots under colonnades, where they can rest their arms just so, adjusting their sinus while pretending to read law scrolls they memorized 10 years ago. And in the middle of it all, street vendors. One of them is selling toga clips. Technically illegal, yes, but practical. Little bronze clasps designed to hold folds in place when you've been standing too long. Purists scoff. Pragmatists smile, and by two. One last secret? Some togas had hidden weights sewn into the hem, tiny lead beads to help the fabric drape more cleanly. The irony? In an empire obsessed with strength and freedom, its most iconic garment often required cheating to stay upright. You leave the Forum behind now, heading back toward the nobleman's home. His day is done. His speech went well. No wardrobe malfunctions. His folds held up under pressure. He's earned the right to disrobe. And the undressing? Almost as complex as the getting dressed. The toga is removed slowly, with the same care given to folding bed sheets or unrolling ancient scrolls. Each section is lifted, shaken, and carefully rolled. No one wants a wrinkled toga. And remember, there's no modern dry cleaning. That's coming soon. For now, the nobleman sighs, free again in his tunic, walking barefoot across the cool marble. His vestitor hangs the toga to air out, inspecting the hem for street dust and any evidence of lunch mishaps. You too are tired. Watching a toga get folded, worn, and removed is surprisingly exhausting. So many layers, so much restraint, but also something oddly satisfying, like watching a complicated ritual completed perfectly. You feel like you've just sat through a 3-act play starring 18 feet of wool and one man's reputation. And in the quiet that follows, as the nobleman sips watered wine and the lamps begin to glow, you start to wonder, maybe this was the point all along. The toga isn't meant to be comfortable. It's meant to remind you, every step, every pleat, every breath, that you are part of something larger, something deliberate, something old.
The sky outside shifts from dusty gold to a moody gray blue, casting longer shadows across the mosaic floors of the domus. You trail behind a younger Roman this time, a boy, maybe 16, with the wide-eyed energy of someone trying too hard to look like he knows what he's doing. Today is his first time wearing the toga viralis, the so-called toga of manhood, and he is determined not to trip on it. You admire the optimism. He fidgets with the folds. They don't sit quite right. The sinus puffs out like a pastry, and the umbo is sagging slightly off-center. But no one says anything. Today is ceremonial. Imperfect draping is forgivable, as long as he doesn't walk directly into a column. You're now inside one of the lesser-known rituals of Roman life, the toga ceremony, where a young man sheds the short tunic of boyhood and takes up the heavy, adult wool of responsibility. And sweat, so much sweat, because yes, the toga viralis is heavier than the earlier garments, and yes, it's still undyed. No fancy stripes, no embroidered patterns, just pure, unbleached wool, the Roman equivalent of business casual. The transition usually happens around the age of 15 or 16, often on the Liberalia, a spring festival honoring Liber, the god of fertility and freedom. Because nothing says, "I am now a man," quite like symbolic clothing and mild public awkwardness.
The family gathers. There's wine, there's a small fire where the boy's bula, a protective amulet worn since infancy, is offered up, the leather cord curling in the heat. You notice the boy trying not to flinch as it burns. Superstition runs deep. Letting go of childhood is harder when it's literally smoking. Historians still argue whether this rite was universal or reserved mainly for elite families. The records are spotty. Some scholars think poorer boys skipped the whole theatrical process, while others argue that even modest households participated in their own scaled-down versions. What's clear is this. For those who wore the toga viralis, the weight wasn't just physical. It meant accountability, legal responsibility, the right to speak in public, and the duty to not sound like an idiot while doing so. Your young Roman, now semi-draped and semi-terrified, heads into the city with his father. There's a ritual procession, just the family walking quietly through the forum, really, but it feels grand. He tries to keep his folds tidy. People nod politely. He's now fair game for civic duty, military service, and deeply disappointing lunch meetings. The toga viralis wasn't optional. It was a state-imposed uniform. You had to wear it in court, in the Senate, at public events, not because it was comfortable, but because it made you visible, like a wool badge of citizenship, or a wearable resume that screamed, "Yes, I am now someone who pays taxes." Now, imagine being 17 and wearing that thing during summer. Rome, June, air heavy with basil and sewage, the wool sticks to your arms, it itches, you dream of linen. But linen is Greek, and you are Roman, so you suffer, stylishly. The boy stops to greet an older cousin, a man wearing the toga pitexta, easily identified by its thick purple border. That's the toga of magistrates and high-ranking officials, also worn by certain priests. Its rich stripe makes it look like someone lined the edge of a curtain in grape jelly. Status loud and clear. But unlike the boy's new toga, the pretexta can be taken off after hours. The viralis, that one sticks with you.
The cousin adjusts his own garment as he leans forward. His folds are practiced, natural, subtle in their swagger. You see the boy take mental notes, how to keep the sinus neat, how to avoid lifting the right arm too quickly and unraveling the entire left side. This is clothing as mentorship. Fringe tidbit? The toga viralis often became a family heirloom, passed down, patched up, handed to a younger brother when the eldest outgrew it. Some families stored them in perfumed cedar chests, rolled tightly like sacred scrolls. Toga inheritance, a low-key stressor for younger siblings everywhere. You move with them now through the busy street, dodging a cart full of dates and a dog that is absolutely not on a leash. The city buzzes with noise, and the boy tries to blend in. He doesn't. Not yet. His toga flutters a little too much. His pace is too quick, but he's learning. They pass a statue of Augustus, marble robes eternally perfect, folds sculpted into immortality. Real Romans could only dream of such static grace. In truth, even emperors fumbled with their togas. Augustus himself, according to some sources, was known for his obsession with neatness, and may have rehearsed his draping to an almost ridiculous degree. You imagine him late at night, whispering to his vestitor, again, but this time with more nobility. The walk ends at the tabularium, the city's record hall, where the boy is officially inscribed as a full citizen. His name is added to the census, and from now on he can be summoned for military service. The toga suddenly feels a bit tighter, or maybe that's just the air. He stands a little straighter. It's not pride, exactly, it's awareness. Everyone here sees him now not as a child, but as someone who matters.
That's the silent promise of the toga virilis. You're no longer invisible. Congratulations. Also, your laundry just got much more complicated. Back at home that evening, the boy is quiet. His mother inspects his toga for signs of wear, a bit of dust on the hem, a fold slightly off, but otherwise decent. Not flawless, but passable. She smooths his shoulder and lets him be. And in the privacy of his room, he takes the toga off slowly, carefully, folding it along the lines taught to him that morning. It's not graceful, it bunches, but he'll get there, because now it's his toga, his identity, his future. The garment rests on a low stool by the window. Moonlight spills over it like pale silk, and you realize this isn't just wool, it's a declaration. You drift with the image, the folds of cloth holding shape in the quiet, waiting for tomorrow.
The next morning drapes itself softly across the Roman skyline, amber light seeping between the pillars of temples and bouncing off rooftops tiled in terracotta. You find yourself in the bustling square of the Forum Romanum. Again, where togas swirl like silent dialogue. Every fold whispers something, every drape makes a statement. And nowhere is that sartorial language louder or more scrutinized than in politics. You spot a group of senators gathering near the Curia Julia, their movements deliberate, their togas pristine. These are not the stiff ceremonial statues you see lining marble halls. These are real men, blinking against the sun, subtly adjusting their umbos, and trying very hard not to look winded by the short walk. They're all wearing the toga candida, a special variant bleached to an almost supernatural white, literally shining toga. Not metaphorical shine, real blinding high-maintenance white. The kind of white that shows every grape stain and dust smudge. Why? Because when you're campaigning for office, subtlety is for cowards. This toga is where we get the modern word candidate. To wear it meant you were asking the people to choose you. It meant putting yourself on display, every fold a silent plea for approval. You could almost hear it rustle. I am clean. I am worthy. I absolutely did not bribe anyone. Please ignore the goats. The bleaching was no small feat. Roman wool is naturally off-white, like oatmeal or last week's laundry. So whitening it took serious effort. They used a concoction of sulfur, chalk, and sometimes fermented urine. That's right, your fancy politician toga was soaked in wee. And then sun-dried, fluffed, and brushed until it gleamed. Political ambition never smelled so ambitious. Tidbit: some ambitious candidates went beyond the bleach and added a bit of powdered chalk just before public appearances to make their togas glow. That's right, ancient Rome had fashion hacks, an ancient dry shampoo, basically. You follow one candidate, a wiry man with well-oiled curls and the face of someone trying very hard to look humble. Through the Forum. His assistants hover nearby, adjusting the back pleats when no one's looking. His teeth are suspiciously white, his sandals too new. He pauses every few steps to clasp hands with citizens, always using his right hand, always smiling with the practiced warmth of someone who definitely rehearsed in front of a mirror. This is the umbitus, the campaign trail of the Republic. You didn't post ads, you didn't release videos. You put on your brightest toga and walked. A lot. You greeted people by name. You complimented their children. You asked about their grain allotments. You kissed babies, if necessary. And all of it happened in wool. Sweaty, judgmental wool. Historians still argue whether these campaign walks were more performative than persuasive. Did anyone actually change their mind based on how well a candidate draped their folds? Or was it all just political theater with added foot blisters? One thing's certain, toga candida wearers were judged not just by their promises, but by their posture, their tone, and yes, the cleanliness of their sinus. You slip into the Senate building itself, ducking behind a pillar as the session begins. The room fills with quiet murmurs and the soft swish of fabric on marble. Everyone is seated, arranged by seniority. The togas blend into one field of muted wool, except for those few candida flares that stand out like fireworks at a funeral. Oratory begins. The speaker rises, arms controlled, fabric shifting slightly. Great Roman rhetoric wasn't just about what you said, it was how you looked while saying it. A sudden hand motion could toss a fold dramatically over the shoulder. A pause in speech might be emphasized by gripping the umbo. Every gesture was magnified by layers of cloth. Cicero, yes, that Cicero, was reportedly obsessed with toga technique. He practiced his motions, knowing that a well-placed swirl could underline a rhetorical blow. One of his students wrote about how Cicero once scolded an orator, not for his argument, but for letting his sinus flap like laundry in a breeze. Brutal. You can't help but chuckle. Even in the heart of empire, among laws and legions, someone was critiqued for their outfit flapping too much. Outside again, you see toga politics in its more intimate form. Networking. A small group stands near a statue of Jupiter, speaking softly, sipping watered wine. Their togas are less gleaming, more practical. These are seasoned senators, men who've already played the candidacy game and lived to tell the tale. They nod slowly, fold their arms strategically to hide belly folds, and adjust their posture to show dignity without stiffness. Here, the toga acts like a chessboard. A fold shifted forward, listening. A fold tucked higher, maybe asserting dominance. A wrinkle left uncorrected, either defiance or forgetfulness. It's a gamble. Then comes the arrival of someone unexpected, a younger man in a dazzling toga candida, alone, without assistance. He's clearly new to this. The older senators raise eyebrows so slightly it's almost imperceptible. He offers a greeting, voice too loud, a smile a bit too wide. His sinus? Gaping. His umbo? Non-existent. They nod, politely, coldly. That's the thing about political togas. They're not just costumes, they're code. And if you don't know how to read or write in that language, you're lost. Like someone walking into a modern courtroom in pajamas and wondering why no one takes them seriously. As the sun climbs, the heat presses down harder. One of the candidates discreetly dabs his forehead with the edge of his toga. Not ideal, technically improper, but it's either that or dripping sweat onto the consul's scroll. You give him points for restraint. Later, you catch the same man being redressed by his vestitor in a shaded courtyard. His chalk-dusted toga is limp now, folds wilted by the weight of the day. The servant works quickly, smoothing the umbo, repuffing the sinus, whispering advice, like a fashion pit crew. This is the hidden side of Roman campaigning, the reset between rounds. Most people see the confident stride through the forum, not the frantic toga triage behind closed doors. One more quirky fact? Some toga wearers reportedly trained their bodies to hold a fold position without twitching for extended periods. Imagine yoga meets origami. It's said that seasoned orators could freeze in dramatic stances for half an hour, toga held just so, like a statue with anxiety. Back in the forum, things begin to wind down. The crowd thins. The candidates disappear into their villas, their polished performances rolled up with their togas and tucked away until tomorrow. A few toga candida folds have grayed around the hem from dust and cobblestone grit. Political glamour fades quickly. You stand alone for a moment, the fabric of the day still echoing around you. So much was said, and yet so much was unsaid, left to the angles of wool, the subtle shift of drape, the flicker of pleats in sunlight. And you realize these togas didn't just cover bodies, they clothed ambitions, fears, posturing, and pride. Every stripe and bleach mark was a line in the story of a man trying to shape a republic with a swish and a speech.
You walk back through the cooling forum, the stones beneath your feet warmed from the sun, your mind softening with each step. The political arena sleeps for now, but the togas, they'll be back tomorrow, bright, blinding, slightly ridiculous, and utterly essential.
The sun dips behind the Palatine Hill, and the sky warms into a soft watercolor, ochre fading into lavender. You find yourself stepping through the gates of a large suburban villa, its walls lined with creeping ivy, the scent of crushed bay leaves trailing behind as you pass under an archway carved with vines and theatrical masks. Welcome to the private world of Roman fashion, the dressing rooms, the prep rituals, the household drama of getting dressed in something that looks like a couch and fits like a bedsheet. Inside, it's a flurry of motion. Servants move quickly but quietly, adjusting cushions, laying out garments, stoking the fires in the caldarium for an evening bath. And in the center of the room, there it is, the vestitorium, or the Roman equivalent of a walk-in closet, minus the built-in LED lights and shoe racks. This one's more rustic. Smells like lavender oil and slightly overcooked wool. Tonight's protagonist? A wealthy senator, somewhere in his late 50s, who's decided to host a private dinner, a cena, for clients, allies, and the occasional gossip-prone neighbor. It's important, not because any laws will be passed over roast duck, but because appearances must be maintained. You're only as respected as your folds are crisp, after all. He stands in the middle of the room, arms lifted slightly like a very patient scarecrow, while two vestitores, his personal dressers, work in tandem. One holds the toga, folded just so, the sinus pre-plumped like a decorative pillow. The other begins the ritualistic wrapping. Over the left shoulder, under the right arm, looped high, the umbo carefully sculpted like sourdough dough rising in slow motion. There's a kind of ballet to this. The senator breathes in when told, tilts when signaled, and shifts his weight exactly as he's learned over decades of political life. This isn't just clothing, it's performance prep. He's being turned into a living symbol of Roman authority. The toga is heavy, over 15 feet of wool, draped without pins or stitching. The trick isn't just the folding, it's keeping it in place. A slight lean? Disaster. An unexpected sneeze? Catastrophe. Which is why most togas were rarely worn without help. The self-draping Roman was a rare and ambitious beast, and usually sweaty. Fringe tidbit? Wealthy Romans sometimes used lead weights sewn into the hem to keep their togas in place. Lead, as in the stuff you're definitely not supposed to have near your kidneys. But hey, anything for that perfect shoulder cascade. Your senator inspects himself in a polished bronze mirror. He's not looking at his face, he's checking his lines. Is the sinus full but not ridiculous? Is the umbo poised like a thoughtful punctuation mark? He nods, satisfied. The vestitores step back, mission complete. There's a faint sheen of effort on their foreheads, the look of men who've just reassembled the tent during a windstorm. Historians still argue whether vestitores were considered high-status servants or just very patient ones. Some evidence suggests they were deeply trusted, responsible not only for appearance but for discretion. After all, they heard everything. Every grumble, every self-pitying monologue, every, "Do you think Marcus will notice my new belt?" whispered into the linen towels. As you follow the senator toward the dining room, you pass others in various states of toga undress. A younger man is struggling to rewrap his after tripping in the garden. The folds are crooked, the umbo a sad lump, the sinus. Let's not even talk about the sinus. A nearby vestitor sighs and steps in, beginning again from the top. It's like resetting a game level. And here's a delicious reality check. These fancy Romans didn't just wear togas to be formal. They wore them because they were expected to, even when it was wildly inconvenient. Want to appear at court? Toga. Want to vote? Toga. Want to just attend someone's dinner and not be judged into oblivion? Toga. It was the law, the norm,
the woolen leash of the elite.
The senator enters the triclinium, where couches line the walls in a U-shape, soft lighting flickers from oil lamps, and platters of olives and cheese wait on low tables. Guests begin to arrive, each one greeted by a small nod and a full-body toga scan. Subtle judgments hang in the air like incense. There's a merchant whose toga is a touch too long. He keeps stepping on the hem, which earns a raised brow from a former consul. Another guest's umbo droops a bit too far forward, brushing the appetizer plate. You can almost hear the silent disapproval. If your folds can't hold their shape, how can your arguments? This dinner is less about food and more about presence. The way people sit in their togas, how they lean, gesture, pour wine. It's a language. One nobleman even flares his sinus before making a point about grain prices. Dramatic flair meet literal flair. You tuck yourself into a corner, unnoticed but not unamused. The evening unfolds in layers, like a good toga. Politics veiled in compliments, rivalries simmering beneath shared laughter, and always, always, the presence of fabric shaping every move. The senator reclines gracefully, one elbow propped just enough to show control, but not too much to seem arrogant. That's the thing about these social dinners. You were supposed to appear effortless, even though your garment required more setup than a traveling circus. Quirky aside, some Roman hosts had toga cushions shaped to accommodate the folds of the sinus and umbo while reclining. Imagine a memory foam snack throne, but wool-friendly. At one point, a younger guest, maybe a nephew, gets up to refill a wine cup and accidentally lets his umbo flap forward, revealing the tunic underneath. Scandalous? Not quite, but enough to draw a few chuckles and one perfectly timed cough from a nearby senator. A social tap on the shoulder, ancient Rome style. Your host smooths his folds absently as he listens to a merchant discuss shipping delays. He isn't truly listening. He's thinking about tomorrow's meeting with a praetor, and whether he should wear the toga with the slight purple tint, not the praetexta, just a wool variant dyed faintly with murex. A power move or too flashy? Decisions. It hits you somewhere between the fifth toast and the sixth casual insult. This is what Roman power looks like up close. It's not just about temples or speeches or battles. It's wool. It's drapery. It's posture and patience and knowing exactly how long to hold a gaze before your sinus slides out of place. The dinner ends with dried fruits and perfumed water. Guests rise slowly, adjusting their folds with subtle tugs, the way modern folk might check their tie or hair in a mirror. Everything about the toga, how you wore it, who folded it, how often you tripped on it, told a story. You follow your host back to the vestitorium. The vestitos are waiting with a soft robe and a fresh towel. The senator lifts his arms again, sighs, and lets the toga fall from his shoulders like the end of a long performance. One servant catches it mid-drop, careful not to let the fabric crumble. They begin the folding. Always the same pattern. Precise, reverent, like preparing a sacred object for storage, because that's what it is. And as the room dims and the sounds of the house soften to a sleepy hush, you're left watching that last fold being tucked under, one edge of wool curled into a perfect loop, ready for tomorrow. The toga waits. You breathe deeply, and so do your feet. The morning fog clings low to the Tiber River as you drift past rows of houses where rooftops still shimmer with dew. Down one winding street, past a bakery already puffing out warm steam, and beyond a sleepy wine merchant's stall, lies a quieter side of Rome. Not the grand marble spaces of senators in spectacle, but the modest courtyards of everyday citizens, the people who wear tunics instead of togas, unless they absolutely have to. Here, the toga isn't a symbol of power, it's a chore.
you slip into the home of a mid-level bureaucrat, a man whose job mostly consists of counting taxes no one wants to pay and maintaining ledgers thicker than his patience. He doesn't love the toga. In fact, he openly resents it. But protocol is protocol. He's got a small claims case to attend today, and guess what? Yep, toga time. His wife is already helping him wrestle with the folds. Their youngest daughter watches from the corner, giggling as he grunts like a gladiator in woolen chains. This toga isn't bleached or edged with purple. It's simple, off-white, and a little threadbare at the hem. The kind of garment that says, "I follow the rules, but let's not pretend I enjoy it." He flings his arm out, trying to get the sinus over his shoulder, but it slips, again and again. The wife sighs. The daughter suggests just tying it like a cape. You smile. That might not fly with the magistrate. The thing is, togas were mandatory for many public functions. Court appearances, official business, religious rites. Even low-level officials had to wear them if they wanted to be taken seriously. Imagine being forced to wear a wool burrito just to argue about your neighbor's stolen goat. Historians still argue whether these strict clothing rules reinforced class divides or were meant to unify public decorum. Was the toga a social equalizer or a woolen whip keeping the lower classes sweating and swearing just to look like they belonged? Our bureaucrat finally gets his folds semi-cooperative and heads into the city, walking with the determined shuffle of someone who knows one wrong step will unravel his dignity like a dropped scroll. Along the way, he passes others in similar states of struggle, a baker's apprentice running late to deliver his master's petition. His toga is barely staying up, and he's holding it together with one hand while dodging donkey carts. A veteran soldier trying to navigate the courthouse steps, cursing under his breath as his sinus flaps into his face like an angry curtain. And here's the catch. None of these people want to wear togas, but they must. Not because they love tradition, but because a toga is like a ticket. It opens doors. No toga, no entry. It's your license to participate, even if you look like a wool-wrapped scarecrow while doing it. Fringe tidbit? Some lower-class Romans would rent togas for official duties. Yep, ancient toga rentals were a thing. You'd show up at a stall, pick out the least musty drape, pay a few coins, and pretend you didn't notice the questionable stain near the umbo. It was formal wear on a budget. You follow your bureaucrat into the basilica, the large public building where minor legal disputes are handled. Inside, the stone floor echoes with the shuffling of nervous feet. Everyone is toga-clad, but there's a spectrum. The upper-crust togas glide like well-trained swans. The lower-class ones sag, wrinkle, and trip on themselves like startled goats. He takes his place, adjusts his umbo, tries not to sweat visibly. Across the hall, a merchant loudly sighs as his sinus droops, flapping into the parchment he's trying to read aloud. The magistrate scowls.
You begin to notice that the social hierarchy of Rome plays out not just in wealth or speech, but in the way people wear wool. There are toga whisperers, and then there are the rest. It's like watching a ballroom dance where some know the steps and others are just trying not to fall in the punch bowl. As the case proceeds, over something riveting like a disputed vegetable patch, the real drama is in the folds. Someone's umbo pops out unexpectedly. Another person's sinus gets accidentally tucked into their belt. A child in the back starts giggling. The magistrate glares. The toga, once again, becomes less a garment and more a text of patience. Historians note that even in its heyday, the toga was unpopular. Letters, graffiti, and personal diaries include complaints about its weight, its heat, its general woolly oppression. One surviving scrap of satire refers to it as the sheep's revenge. Poetic and itchy. After the court session, you follow a group of tired citizens exiting into the heat. Several immediately strip off their togas, revealing simple tunics underneath. Their shoulders relax, their steps lighten. One man even hugs his folded toga like a villain finally defeated. "Until next time," he mutters. You drift toward a neighborhood market, McKellum, where commerce buzzes and color explodes. Here, the toga fades from view. Tunics rule this world. Shorter, cooler, practical. The garment of butchers, bakers, potters, and pickpockets. It's refreshing. Honest. You can actually see people's knees. In a corner stall, an older man sharpens knives with rhythmic precision. He wears a deeply stained apron over his tunic and laughs as a young man clearly new to the trade complains about sweating through his borrowed toga at the tax office. "Wear it long enough," the old man says, "and it stops being clothes. Becomes a burden you carry just to stay seen." You linger on that. The toga, at its most democratic, was supposed to be a sign of citizenship, a marker of dignity, not just status. But when it becomes too impractical, too uncomfortable, and too symbolic, it stops being about pride and starts being about pressure. And yet, here they all are, wrapping themselves up, folding, struggling, renting, because even when you hate the uniform, you need what it represents. Before night falls, you return to the bureaucrat's home. His daughter is waiting with a bowl of dates and honey. He plops down, unrolling the toga from his body like someone freeing themselves from a particularly aggressive snake. His wife shakes out the wrinkles and begins to refold it for tomorrow. It's not ceremonial. It's routine, part of life. And the toga, despite its weight, takes its place back on the shelf, quiet, neutral, waiting. Not noble or grand or theatrical, just necessary. You sit with them for a moment as the oil lamps flicker and shadows stretch long across the room. Outside, the world keeps turning, but inside, the toga rests. The Roman sun rises sharp and golden across the terracotta rooftops, but you're not in the heart of the city today. Instead, your feet crunch lightly over gravel paths that wind through the countryside, leading you to a villa rustica, a working rural estate where the air smells faintly of olive trees, earth, and sheep. So many sheep. Because today, you meet the toga at its very origin, before the folds, before the forum, before the pomp. This is toga country. You arrive just as a group of shepherds corral a flock into a stone enclosure, their dogs nipping gently at woolly ankles. The sheep are bleeding their confusion, but they have no idea their coats will soon become the material of senatorial smugness, which feels a little unfair, honestly. If they knew where that wool was headed, they might put up more of a fight. The process begins with shearing. One by one, the sheep are calmed, more or less, and carefully trimmed. The wool falls in soft puffs, some of it springing slightly, as if it resents being removed. The shepherds, mostly young men with sun-leathered hands, laugh and shout instructions to each other while working quickly. This isn't about fashion. This is survival and industry in one squeaky little bleat at a time. Historians still argue whether Roman wool was of particularly high quality or if the sheer scale of production made it noteworthy. Some sources suggest Roman breeders selectively raised sheep for finer coats. Others think most togas were just scratchy blankets with political aspirations. You follow the wool from sheep to workshop, where it's sorted and cleaned in vats of water. The smell? Let's call it aggressively earthy. The cleaning process, known as fulling, involves trampling the wool with bare feet in vats of water mixed with clay, ash, and, yes, fermented urine. You heard that right. Pee. A real highlight of ancient textile science. Fringe tidbit?
In some cities, urine was collected from public urinals and taxed for use in wool processing. Emperor Vespasian even instituted a urine tax, and when criticized, he supposedly held up a coin and said, "Money does not stink." Truly, a branding genius. Once cleaned and carded, the wool is spun into yarn. Women, often enslaved or hired local workers, sit in shaded courtyards, twisting and spooling fiber with quick, practiced fingers. The rhythm of it all is mesmerizing. A low song hums in the background, and you watch the strands become thread, thread become cloth, and cloth become potential. You pause by a loom. A teenage girl is weaving, her shuttle flicking back and forth like a gentle heartbeat. The toga fabric starts here. Off-white, slightly coarse, but strong. The finished cloth will be sent to city fullers, then tailors, or sold by weight in the market. Eventually, someone will fold it into dignity. But here, on this sun-baked farm, the toga is just a distant rumor. No one folds fabric in elaborate arcs. No one talks about the umbo or sinus. They talk about weight and cost and weather. Will the wool dry fast enough? Will the rains ruin this year's batch?
One older woman sits under a fig tree, sewing a simple tunic. She snorts when someone mentions the toga. "Togas," she says, squinting into the sun. "They wear those in court, don't they? You ever try milking a goat in one of those things?" Everyone laughs. You smile. Yet, despite the jokes, there's respect here. Wool is life. It feeds families, pays taxes, wraps babies, warms soldiers. The toga is just one extravagant branch on the sturdy woolen tree. You travel with a shipment heading toward the city. Bales of fabric loaded onto wooden carts, bumping along dusty roads toward the capital. The driver whistles a tune, occasionally swatting at flies. He tells you he's been delivering wool for 20 years. Once, he says, he saw Cicero himself on the road, complaining about a toga crease. Probably a lie, but you let him have it. By the time you reach the Phallonica, or Roman Fullery, the air shifts. It's humid, slightly sulfuric. You're back in the city's underbelly, where togas are born not from ceremony, but from suds and stomping. Inside, workers, again often enslaved, tread in long vats, cleaning cloth in repetitive cycles. The space echoes with splashing and low murmurs. Finished wool is dried on racks, brushed with thistles to raise the nap, and finally bleached in the sun. Some togas are left off-white, the classic toga virilis. Others are dyed or edged for higher classes. Historians debate how consistent Roman dyeing methods really were. Some argue that purple trim always meant senatorial rank. Others point out that purple was sometimes faked, cheap dyes mimicking the royal hue for social clout. Ancient bootleg couture. You pass a cloth merchant's stall where newly finished togas are displayed, neatly folded. The vendor boasts of genuine southern wool, as worn by senators and poets. You try not to laugh. The only poet you saw today was a shepherd muttering about fleas. A young man approaches the stall. It's his first day working at a magistrate's office, and he needs a presentable toga. The vendor eyes him up and down, selects a piece, and unfolds it with a practiced flick. He demonstrates the drape over his own shoulder, fast, sharp, nearly magical. The customer nods solemnly, takes it home with the careful reverence of someone holding both hope and obligation. The toga, now fully formed, begins its final life, draped, judged, readjusted. Its story, so rooted in shepherds and weavers and fullers, is mostly forgotten by those who wear it. They don't feel the sheep's shiver, hear the loom's song, or smell the sharp memory of ammonia. But you do. You've walked every step, seen every hand that touches the cloth, and somehow that changes the way you look at it. The folds aren't just folds, they're maps, time stitched into wool. As dusk settles, you watch one of the fullers step outside and stretch his arms.
His tunic clings to his body from the day's work. He looks up at the sky and sighs, brushing dust from his sleeves. Not a single toga in sight, but every inch of the man smells like one. You walk away slowly, the sound of clinking vats and distant sheep following behind. The toga isn't just politics or fashion, it's a journey, from field to fold.
You wake to the smell of warm stone and a faint whiff of citrus. Rome again, but a different kind of morning. The streets are quieter now, as if even the pigeons have paused to catch their breath. Somewhere in the distance, a poet is reciting verses to an audience of 3 mildly interested cats. This is not a day of markets or court hearings. It's a day of mourning. Today, you follow the toga not through life, but through death. Funerals in ancient Rome weren't subtle affairs. You're standing at the edge of the Via Sacra as a funeral procession makes its way through the city, and everything around you has taken on a tone of performance. There's wailing, some of it genuine, some of it hired. Musicians play mournful tunes on flutes and horns. People line the street not just to pay respects, but to watch, to evaluate, and, let's be honest, to gossip. The deceased was a former magistrate, wealthy, connected, which means the funeral is elaborate, and that means togas. So many togas. At the front of the procession, actors wear wax masks modeled after the family's ancestors, imagines as they're called, and each actor is dressed to resemble the status and style of the figure they represent. You notice a toga praetexta, trimmed in faded purple, a toga candida, gleaming like sunlit parchment, and even a toga pulla, the dark mourning toga, draped across someone trying very hard not to trip on it. Historians still argue whether these funeral images were accurate representations or just social theater, a way for families to project more glory onto their lineage than truly existed. But the spectacle? Oh, that's very real. The toga pulla, a rare variant, is your main attraction here. Worn only during mourning, it's dyed a deep gray or brown, somber, unflashy, heavy with symbolism. You can feel the weight just looking at it, not only because it's wool, but because it's carrying the gravity of death on its shoulders. Fringe tidbit? In some cases, mourners who couldn't afford a toga pulla would simply turn their regular toga inside out or rub it with ash to darken the fabric. Mourning on a budget. DIY grief couture. You follow the procession to the forum where the eulogy takes place. The deceased lies in a funerary bed, surrounded by garlands. His own body is wrapped in his finest toga. Arms crossed, expression carefully arranged. The speaker, likely his son, steps forward, adjusting his sinus, and begins to speak of virtues, of service, of public duty. You watch as the crowd nods, murmurs, weeps, or pretends to, depending on their proximity to the inheritance. And then a curious thing happens. As the eulogy continues, more figures step forward, other relatives, each wearing togas symbolizing their branch of the family. There's a cousin in a worn toga virilis, a distant uncle in a dusty praetexta, even a teenage boy in an overlong toga candida, perhaps hopeful of his first political post.
The togas here aren't just clothing. They're silent biographies. One man stands straight-backed, his toga pristine. Another's is wrinkled, as if he dressed in a rush or simply didn't care. A woman stands nearby, not in a toga, of course, but in a dark stola, her posture saying more than her words ever could. Even in mourning, Rome is performing. After the eulogy, the body is carried out of the city.
Roman law forbade burials within city limits, so the procession winds outward, past city gates and olive groves, toward the family tomb. You notice a few mourners begin to loosen their togas as the formal part ends, shaking out the folds, brushing off dust, the ritual of dress fading back into the reality of grief. The burial is quiet. Earth falls like soft drum beats. A few togas are laid flat beside the grave for a final moment, symbolically releasing the role the dead once played. Toga to soil, status to silence. Later that evening, you find yourself in a modest home near the Aventine Hill. A family is observing the private mourning period, or luctus. Their togas are still darkened. Meals are simple. Mirrors are covered. There's a hush in the air like velvet over glass. One teenage boy sits cross-legged, absent-mindedly folding and refolding a strip of wool. He'll wear his toga virilis in a few months, stepping into manhood after his grandfather's death. His mother corrects the fold gently, saying, "That's not the sinus, that's the umgo, remember?" The boy rolls his eyes, but keeps practicing. You think back to the funeral masks, the togas draped over bodies both living and not, and you realize the garment's journey doesn't end at death. It continues, through memory, through ritual, through the hands of those still living. Historians often mention the toga pulla in passing, a footnote in the grand narrative of Roman dress. But here, in this moment, it feels heavier than all the others, because it's not about who you are or who you hope to be. It's about who you've lost. The next day, the mourning togas will be folded away, not immediately, but soon. Life in Rome, despite all its wool and ritual, must continue. Shops will open, forums will buzz, and slowly light will return to the folds. As you walk back through the city, the streets begin to feel less funereal. You pass a group of children playing with scraps of cloth, pretending to be senators. One girl wears a tea-stained bedsheet like a toga pulla, and dramatically throws herself onto a cushion shouting, "Whoa, my goat has died!" Her friend claps and declares her the new family matriarch. Even grief, it seems, has its curtain call. And just like that, you understand. The toga isn't merely a garment of life. It's a garment of passage into adulthood, into public duty, and finally, into memory.
You wake in the shadow of Rome's Palatine Hill, the sky stretched pale and pearly over crumbling marble and cypress silhouettes. Morning birds trill somewhere off to the left. A street vendor coughs somewhere off to the right. Your toga, if you were wearing one, is imaginary, but even so, it feels heavy with possibility. Today is a day of ambition, and you can feel it in the air. Not the kind built quietly in back rooms or whispered through doorways. This is ambition made visible, stitched into folds, dyed into hems, and swished dramatically through every public square. Today, the toga becomes your tool of persuasion. You're standing outside the basilica, the great civic hall where lawsuits unfold and careers are made or broken. And as you step inside, you're immediately struck by the sea of white wool, rows of men draped in their best toga candida, the dazzling chalk-whitened toga worn by political hopefuls. If this is Rome's version of a campaign button, it is aggressive, unmissable, and probably itchy. The word candida literally means glowing white. To wear it is to say, "Look at me, I am pure, honest, and worthy," which in Rome is often code for, "Please ignore what happened at the dinner party last spring." These candidates strut and shuffle and clear their throats meaningfully. They shake hands, deliver practiced smiles, and occasionally pull their togas tighter around their chests when delivering heartfelt promises. You watch one man pat a child on the head, whisper something kind to an old woman, and then trip over his own umbo. He recovers with a bow so smooth you almost applaud. Historians still argue whether the whitening of the toga candida was symbolic or strategic, or both. Some suggest that it physically blinded spectators in the sun, giving the candidate a kind of heavenly glow. Others say it simply made the wearer more visible in a crowd. Either way, it was the original power move. The fringe tidbit? Some hopefuls bribed their toga whiteners to use a special blend of chalk and lime that would cling longer even in the rain. Fashion meets fraud, Roman edition. You follow one candidate, Gaius, let's call him, through his daily round of ambitus, the formal Roman practice of courting votes. He's young, ambitious, and probably rehearsed his mirror smile 1,000 times. His toga candida is pristine. His breath smells faintly of mint and desperation. He stops at a tailor's stall and adjusts a pleat. "You have to keep the sinus wide," he mutters. "People like space. It says you're open." His assistant nods solemnly, as if the folds truly contain the secrets of charisma. At the forum, Gaius climbs the steps of the rostra. Around him other men prepare to speak, adjusting hems, clearing throats, and flicking crumbs off their togas. The order of speakers is a delicate game. Too early, and the crowd isn't warmed up. Too late, and they've wandered off to buy honey cakes.
You watch as one speaker, a seasoned veteran in a less blinding toga, gestures sharply, sending his sinus flaring like a cape. He draws cheers with a well-timed mention of honor, and laughter with a jab at tax collectors. His words are fine, but it's the performance that carries him. The toga here becomes stage costume, weapon, and stage curtain all at once. Your candidate, Gaius, steps up. He begins. His voice wavers. Someone coughs. Then he remembers to sweep his toga back just so, revealing the full breadth of his chest. He speaks of service, duty, the value of clean aqueducts. He stumbles on a line about honesty, but recovers by invoking his grandmother's love of cabbage. The crowd claps politely. Not a standing ovation, but no tomatoes either. Afterwards, he debriefs with his assistant. "Too much umbo?" he asks. "Not enough movement?" They discuss the finer points of toga choreography like ballet instructors. You realize, in Roman politics, fabric is strategy. Historians suggest that orators developed entire routines around their toga handling, gripping, flaring, lifting, letting folds cascade during dramatic pauses. The fabric's rhythm matched the speech's flow. One scholar even proposed that the toga acted like a conductor's baton, guiding audience emotions from apathy to applause. You trail the candidates through the rest of the day. More handshakes, more folded arms, more whispered promises under fig trees. One man tries to win favor by offering complimentary fish sauce. Another just flexes his biceps in a toga exigua, a tighter variant that shows off the goods. It's unclear whether this is genius or desperation, possibly both. Later, as the sun dips behind the temples and casts long shadows across the stone pavements, the togas begin to sag. The candidates sweat. Their smiles grow brittle. A few find quiet corners to slump against a column and debrief. Gaius sits beside a statue of Mercury, head in his hands, toga wrinkled and slightly wine-stained. He says, "Maybe next year, maybe I go for Edile instead." And just like that, the toga candida becomes history. Folded, packed away, perhaps bleached again for another try. It's a costume worn not only for performance, but for the fantasy of being chosen. You walk past a group of young boys reenacting the day's speeches.
One boy drapes himself in a sackcloth and shouts, "I promise cleaner streets and fewer goats in the Senate." His friend topples over laughing. From a distance, the worn stones of the Forum shimmer in the late light. You imagine all the togas that have passed through here, some triumphant, others forgotten. All of them carrying a flicker of hope. Rome is built on that kind of hope. Folded, worn, dirtied, and brightened again.
The sun has barely crested the rooftops, and already the city hums with purpose. You feel it in your bones, or at least in the soles of your imaginary sandals. Today, the toga doesn't just symbolize rank or grief or ambition. Today, the toga must move. It must function. It must survive the daily grind of Roman bureaucracy. You're heading into the belly of civic Rome, the law courts, tax offices, municipal archives. Today, you live the life of a scriba, a Roman clerk, buried in scrolls, and yes, wrapped head to heel in the toga's thick, itchy embrace. You step into the tabularium, Rome's central records office, where public records are stored and preserved. It smells like beeswax, sweat, and papyrus. Stone shelves stretch high above you, each cubby holding the legal entrails of empire. You're here to observe the toga not in ceremony or drama, but in its least glamorous habitat, the office. Most of the clerks wear simplified versions of the toga, often just the toga virilis, with the sinus looped tightly to stay out of the way. This is the everyday toga, designed more for credibility than flair. Wrinkles are tolerated. Stains? Depends on the stain. You spot one clerk carefully folding his umbo over his ink-stained lap, a built-in napkin. Clever. Another uses his sinus as a makeshift scroll sling. It's like watching wool origami in slow motion. One man, probably a senior official, strides through the office in a toga praetexta. The purple trim swishes with each step, a visual reminder that this man can make or ruin your entire week with one signature. The others straighten their postures instinctively. Even paperwork carries a hierarchy here. Historians still argue whether most lower-level civil servants truly wore togas all the time, or if many opted for simpler tunics unless a magistrate was present. The sources are vague, and probably optimistic. Still, in official public settings, the toga remained a non-negotiable symbol of seriousness, even if your only audience was a stack of rent rolls. Fringe tidbit? Some Romans reportedly trained their household slaves to memorize multiple toga folding patterns, depending on the day's function. The senatorial coil, the evidence flap, even a presentation pleat for trials. No, we are not making these names up. Okay, maybe a little. You follow a young clerk, Publius, he says, as he heads to court. He's representing a tax appeal case, and while he's not the speaker, he's carrying the case file. That means he has to look appropriately bland yet competent. His toga is modest but neatly arranged. He clutches it like a shield. The court is packed. Lawyers, called advocati, circle around their clients like seagulls. They too wear togas, but more stylized with extra volume or exaggerated sinus loops. You quickly realize courtroom theatrics are a competitive sport. Publius slides into his corner. His boss stands and begins the presentation, unfurling scrolls like stage props. When making key points, he lifts his sinus for emphasis, then lets it fall dramatically. It's part speech, part interpretive dance.
You listen to two opposing speakers debate land boundaries using legal precedents and hand gestures so wide they nearly knock over a nearby inkwell. At one point, a particularly fiery lawyer uses his toga to dab sweat, gesture to the gods, and subtly flick his rival's scroll off a bench, all in the same motion. That's what we call multitasking. You step outside for air. A group of clients wait on the steps of the basilica, each wearing modest togas or heavy cloaks. These are everyday citizens awaiting trial or judgment, their garments pressed as best they can manage. Some have borrowed better quality togas from friends or patrons. Yes, toga sharing was a thing. Image mattered. One man paces, muttering to himself. You catch snippets. If I speak second, then I flank with the sinus, or should I open with the scroll lift? This isn't a legal strategy, it's a costume rehearsal. As the day rolls on, the court's energy ebbs and flows. The toga's folds wilt. One clerk discreetly slips his sinus into his tunic to free his arms. Another has lost all pretense and simply wrapped his toga like a towel. Bureaucratic dignity only stretches so far. Back at the tabularium, the clerks file reports, fold their togas back into presentable shape, and collapse onto stone benches. One elderly man massages his shoulder where the sinus has tugged all day. Worst invention since lead pipes, he mutters. You nod in agreement, though he can't see you. And then you stumble upon a curious little side room, a dressing corner of sorts. It's where junior officials practice the proper toga drape for public-facing days. You watch a young man attempt the fold, fail, try again, and then give up entirely and drape the wool over his head like a ghost. His mentor chuckles, adjusts the cloth with one flick, and says, "Try again tomorrow. You'll get it." And isn't that the heart of it? Because for all its symbolic weight, the toga is also a workday garment. It rides the same benches as tax collectors, scribes, magistrates, and witnesses. It gets ink on the hem and dust on the folds. It frustrates and exhausts. But it also says, I belong here. I am part of the machine. You take one last look at the records stacked high, deeds, trials, arguments, and you realize every one of them was accompanied by someone tugging, adjusting, or quietly cursing their toga. The real genius of the Roman legal system? It survived centuries under that much fabric.
You drift now into a quieter part of Rome's rhythm, less shouting in the forum, more murmuring in the temples and gardens. The toga you wear, hypothetically of course, feels different today. Lighter, maybe. Not because it weighs less, but because today it means something gentler. Reverence, status, and subtle social performance. You are heading toward a ceremony, one of many scattered across the city's calendar. A dedication at a family shrine, a quiet offering at a temple, even a coming-of-age ritual. All these demand the toga, not as a theatrical prop or bureaucratic costume, but as a signal of respect. It's less stage, more sacred. You arrive at the Ara Pacis, the altar of peace, where a handful of citizens gather in the morning light. The smell of incense tickles your nose. A priest in a brilliantly folded toga praetexta raises his hands, the purple border gleaming softly. He's performed this gesture thousands of times, and every time the folds fall in exactly the same gentle arc. Nearby, a family prepares to induct their son, let's call him Marcus, into adulthood. He's 17, nervous, and very much aware of the toga clutched in his sweaty hands. Today, he trades in his childhood tunic for the toga virilis, the adult toga. It's a big day, not unlike getting your first job, license, or student loan rejection letter. The ritual is simple. He steps forward, his father helps him arrange the wool, and just like that, he's legally a man. Or more accurately, a boy now allowed to get in trouble as a man. The family smiles, a priest nods. Marcus walks a bit like his legs don't belong to him, but the crowd politely pretends not to notice. Historians still argue whether this rite of passage occurred on a boy's exact birthday or was bundled into public festivals like the Liberalia. Either way, it marked a transformation, not just of status, but of fabric. And here's the fringe detail. The boy's childhood bulla, a protective charm he wore around his neck, was often hung on the household shrine that day. It sat there like a little golden punctuation mark at the end of his youth. You trail the family back to their home, where more relatives arrive. More togas, naturally. Some are pristine, some more casual. One great-uncle looks like he's wearing a woolen burrito, but no one corrects him. At his age, he's earned the right to wear his sinus like a shawl if he wants. And it's not just rites of passage. Weddings, funerals, and religious holidays all come with their own toga protocols. You now shift toward a Roman wedding, not the grand imperial kind, but the more typical plebeian variety. Still full of pomp, but with more olives and less peacock feather fans. The bride wears a tunic, but the groom, oh yes, toga time. He dons the toga pura, carefully pleated, with help from a friend who keeps reminding him not to bend at the knees. The folds must say, "I'm stable, responsible, and not secretly terrified."
Guests arrive in their own togas, some fresh, some slightly rumpled, but all with effort clearly made. One woman adjusts her husband's sinus mid-sentence. Another flicks a crumb of her own umbo like it insulted her. You get the sense that social performance isn't paused just because people are smiling and drinking wine. The ceremony itself is a blend of laughter, vows, and the distinct sound of wool shifting awkwardly every time someone moves. But when the couple joins hands and walks together through the doorway, there's a kind of grace to it, even if the groom steps on his hem twice. Later, after a very Roman feast, yes, there's fermented fish sauce, and no, you still shouldn't smell it, you wander outside, where two older men sip watered wine and reminisce. One pokes at the hem of his own toga and says, "Back in my day, we didn't need fancy folds. One wrap, one knot, and you were respectable." His friend snorts. "That's because you never ran for office." The conversation fades into the quiet clinking of cups, and you're reminded again that the toga isn't just about authority or politics, it's about belonging. It connects generations, worn at moments of joy, grief, faith, and change. You pass by a funeral later in the afternoon, somber, slow, marked by the soft rustle of layered cloth. The deceased was a respected elder, and mourners wear togas with extra folds draped over their heads as a sign of mourning. Even the statues seem to lower their eyes. The procession is orderly, a few tears, but mostly quiet reverence. One child fidgets with his father's umbo, tracing the edge with a small finger. The father gently tucks the cloth away, then places his hand over the child's. A simple gesture, wrapped in wool. Here's your quirky note. Some wealthier families hired professional mourners who would exaggerate their grief by pulling dramatically at their togas, rolling in the dust, and wailing like they'd just lost their favorite gladiator. Romans weren't above a little funeral flair. And again, scholars debate. Were these displays of public grief sincere or just performative tradition? Maybe both. Maybe you mourn better when your toga reminds you that you're part of something older and larger than your own sorrow. As twilight settles in, you return to the temple steps. The day is winding down. The city doesn't sleep, not exactly, but it softens. The fountains trickle. Oil lamps glow behind silk curtains. A young couple passes by. Their togas simple but clean, hands brushed with flour from a shared meal. They speak softly, the woman adjusting her partner's shoulder fold with the care of someone who's done it before and will do it again. Rome, in all its noise and dust and sweat, also knows how to hush. You sit on a low wall and watch the folds of the world soften. The toga, so loud in court, so sharp in politics, now drapes quietly around its wearers, not demanding attention, just being. And maybe, just maybe, that's when it's most Roman of all. You wake
figuratively of course, to the gentle squeak of carts and the coo of doves on the eaves above. The early Roman morning is cooler, and your toga, for once, feels like just the right weight. Today your path winds through the artisan districts, workshops, and tailors of Rome. Today you finally ask the question no one dares voice at the forum: who exactly makes all these togas? You duck down a narrow alleyway in the Subura district, the urban heart of everyday Roman life. It's noisy, colorful, and just a bit pungent. You pass a baker hauling bread trays, a woman sweeping her threshold, and finally you reach your destination, a Fulonica, or Roman laundry and textile workshop. Here's your historical fact of the day. Fullers weren't just laundry folk. They were the masters of fabric treatment in Rome. Bleaching, softening, dye fixing, and yes, toga prepping. These weren't just detergent slingers. These were craftsmen of wool. You step inside, and the scent is eye-watering. Why? Well, here's the quirky tidbit. One key ingredient in the toga cleaning and whitening process was human urine, collected in jars placed on street corners. Yes, you are quite literally stepping into a garment that has been lovingly rinsed in what scholars might delicately call alkaline solution. Don't worry, they also used earth clays, lye, and repeated rinsing. Still, if your toga smells oddly like public policy, now you know why. Inside the Fulonica, workers stomp wool in large vats, barefoot, synchronized, rhythmic. You imagine joining in, but realize quickly this is a practice dance. One wrong stomp and you could be flinging wool slurry onto the ceiling. Finished garments hang from ceiling beams, drying. Others are beaten flat with wooden paddles to soften the fabric. One man meticulously arranges pleats on a half mannequin, his fingers quick and precise. He doesn't look up, just mutters, "Don't touch that sinus. It took me an hour." A few steps away, you find a tailor's stall. Here, raw wool is measured, cut, and stitched. Togas, remember, aren't just big blankets. They require shaping. And although they weren't tailored like modern suits, there was a definite art to proportion. You run your hand along one bolt of wool. It's heavy, with a soft nap. This piece will become a toga candida, the blindingly white, heavily chalked garment worn by political hopefuls. It's currently being brushed with fine powdered chalkstone to get that glow, kind of like a woolen LED light. A young woman works the edges, sewing a slightly reinforced border. Keeps it from fraying, she explains, and fray means shame, or at least a lost vote. She points to a series of folded togas on a nearby shelf. This one's for a wedding, that one's for court, that one's, well, he says it's for a poetry reading, but I think he just likes feeling fancy.
You nod. Fashion is eternal. Here's something scholars still argue. Were all togas made locally, or were some imported, pre-dyed and pre-shaped from further out in the empire? Textual evidence is thin. Some think only Rome's elite had access to truly local, high-end tailoring. Others suggest most Romans sourced their wool garments from regional production hubs and had them finished or altered in the city. You leave the shop, the smell of lanolin and chalk still in your nostrils, and head toward the Emporium, Rome's bustling warehouse and market zone. Merchants sell bolts of fabric, threads, pins, and bundles of folded garments. Some even hawk pre-styled togas, shortcuts for the toga-challenged. Not exactly respectable, but good enough for the lower magistrate or impatient philosopher. A stall near the Tiber catches your eye. An older man sells second-hand togas. "One careful consul owner," he jokes. He opens a crate, revealing worn but serviceable garments. They're sorted by size, trim, and degree of sweat stain. Thrifting is timeless. A young man picks one up and tries it on.
It doesn't quite fit, so the vendor tosses him a belt cord. Try the provincial wrap. Sling it left, loop it under, then flare the sinus. No one will notice. You watch the customer struggle, then succeed. A little crooked, but passable. He smiles. Somewhere between the fold and the flare, confidence flickers into existence. On your way back through the forum, you pass a man standing like a statue while a servant readjusts his sinus for the third time. The servant mutters something about master forgetting how long his arms are. You smile. Even those who can afford help still end up tangled in tradition. And here comes your fringe tidbit of the day. During times of high political activity, especially in the late Republic, tailors would offer toga repair services near the Senate buildings, quick fixes for candidates whose umbos had slipped or whose pleats had collapsed from pacing. Back near the Filonica, you see the same workers from this morning sitting on steps, sharing a midday snack. One wears a sleeveless tunic, feet still stained from the dye vat. He leans back, eyes closed, clearly exhausted but satisfied. And you realize this entire ecosystem of folding, fixing, scrubbing, bleaching, and arranging is mostly invisible to history. The famous togas in marble and mosaic didn't walk themselves into place. They were carried there on the backs of fullers, tailors, and chalk dust-stained hands. The sun begins its lazy descent. You pass a last shop where a woman repairs a hem under lamplight. A boy fans the fabric to help it dry faster. The toga, it turns out, is not just a garment. It's a collaborative illusion, a civic performance, an empire-wide production of wool, sweat, and style. So tomorrow, when you put on your toga again, at least in your dreams, maybe give a little nod of thanks to the many invisible hands that made your ridiculous, majestic, eternally awkward outfit possible.
The next layer of this woolly mystery unfolds as your imaginary toga shifts slightly on your shoulders. It's time to explore Rome's fringe, not the geographic edge, but the social one. Today, you step away from senatorial pomp and into alleyways of irony, satire, and subversion, where the toga still shows up, but not always as expected. You're heading toward a small amphitheater, not the Grand Colosseum, but a cozy venue tucked into a block of shops and taverns. Here, Rome's playwrights and performers strut and mock, often wearing exaggerated, oversized, or comically miniature togas. It's theater, and the toga is now costume. The audience rustles as the curtain parts. A stock character, maybe a pompous magistrate, enters wearing a toga at least twice his size. The sinus drapes like a tablecloth caught in the wind. He speaks in booming Latin, his phrases overlong, his pleats even longer. The crowd laughs. They know the type. This is Rome's comedic mirror, and the toga's a prop as much as a symbol. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Atellan farces and Plautine comedies often skewered Roman social norms, including the toga itself. Wearing it badly, too tightly, or with overdone chalking meant you were ripe for ridicule. And here's your fringe detail. Some performers even used reversible togas, one side clean, one stained, to instantly flip between characters, a kind of ancient quick change act. Theater magic, wool edition. You exit the venue just in time to spot a different sort of performer, a philosopher. Stoic, probably. Sitting on a bench, toga wrapped with deliberate messiness, he lectures to no one in particular about the virtue of self-denial and the folly of wealth. A child tosses him a fig. He ignores it nobly, then eats it when no one's looking. The toga, in his case, is simple, undyed, edges fraying a bit. But that's the point. To wear a worn toga was to visually reject Roman vanity.
Philosophers were the original minimalists, but even they had standards. Try walking around togaless, and you'd find yourself accused of impudicitas, or public indecency. Historians still argue whether certain sects like the Cynics wore their togas intentionally disheveled, or whether that interpretation is more poetic than accurate. Either way, the toga becomes performance again, this time of humility. You pass now into the slums. Here the toga appears in fewer forms. It's expensive, impractical. Workers wear tunics, short, sturdy, breathable. Still, on feast days or funerals, even here togas appear, passed down, borrowed, or hastily mended. One man adjusts a toga with visible patches. He stands outside a shrine, lighting a tapper. His daughter smooths his back pleat. She's wearing a clean tunic, hair braided. It's an offering day. Dignity isn't about wealth. It's about effort. You wander onward into the edge of the Aventine, where a political protest simmers. Men and women gather, holding signs and chanting slogans. A few wear togas, but they're dyed in non-traditional colors, reds, greens, blues. It's symbolic, subversive.
And here comes your quirky fact. In the later empire, unauthorized use of colored togas, or imitating the imperial toga picta, could land you in legal trouble. Yes, even fashion had its laws. Still, rebellion threads through the folds. You overhear a woman muttering, "Let the folds fall where they may." She's draped in a toga dyed gray-blue, a handprint painted near the shoulder. Whether that's art or just an accident is unclear. Either way, it catches your eye. From here, you turn back toward the city center, but not before passing through one last curious gathering, an underground poetry salon. Lamps flicker, wine flows. Poets declaim verses about longing, glory, or just bad dates at the baths. Some wear togas here, but almost as irony. The poet with the loudest metaphors wears the smallest umbo, like he's in on the joke. The crowd snaps fingers instead of clapping. Classical hipsters, essentially. A young woman with coal-lined eyes delivers a piece titled "Fold Me Like the Empire." It's half love letter, half political satire. Her sinus is tucked into her belt, toga slightly off the shoulder, stylishly rule-breaking. Another performer takes the stage and sings in Latin-inflected verse about how the Forum smells worse than the Fulanica at midday. You chuckle. It does. Here, the toga is not authority, it's parody, it's art, it's a relic people wear to feel old and clever at the same time. Back on the streets, night sets in. Lamps flicker to life. You hear a few distant cheers, a tavern celebrating a lucky dice throw. Somewhere, a dog barks. You pause near a sculptor's stall, peering at a half-finished marble statue, a senator judging by the shape. The folds are delicately chiseled, but the face is missing. The sculptor steps out and sees you staring. He says, "Hard part's the folds, always is. Get the cloth right and the man feels real. Mess it up and it looks like a bath towel." He laughs and offers you a fig. You decline. He shrugs and eats both. And here's one more fact to wrap things up. Roman artists spent more time carving the toga's folds than almost anything else on statues. The drapery conveyed status, movement, even character. A toga in motion meant ambition. A toga at rest meant stability. A toga with too much fabric? Probably overcompensating. As you walk away, you think about all the roles the toga plays. Uniform, costume, disguise, protest, satire, tribute. It's not just one thing. It never was. And you, still cloaked in your imaginary wool, still swaddled in folds of tradition and irony, feel a little more in on the joke. Rome laughs with you, not at you.
The night grows deeper. Rome hushes under its cloak of stars, the streets quiet now, except for the distant clip of sandals and the rhythmic prip of a nearby fountain. Your toga feels heavier in the stillness, more blanket than garment, more cocoon than statement. And as your footsteps echo gently against the stone, you begin to sense the end of this curious, wool-bound journey. Tonight, you walk slowly through the Campus Martius, once a field for military drills, now dotted with temples, theaters, and quiet corners where Rome breathes between spectacles. The moon casts silver across the paving stones. Your toga brushes faintly at your ankles, gathering a little dust, a little history. You slip through the shadows of marble columns and into a public library. Shelves here groan softly under scrolls and wax tablets. A few figures sit reading by lamp glow, scholars, scribes, night owls with minds too busy to sleep. One adjusts his toga absently as he leans over a scroll. Another has his draped loosely, almost falling from his shoulder, caught somewhere between fashion and forgetfulness. Here's a final mainstream fact. Roman libraries weren't just for the elite. Some were open to the public, including women, though societal restrictions varied wildly over time. Still, the togaed reader beside you could be a merchant, a clerk, or a curious dreamer, just like you. And here's your final fringe tidbit. Some scholars claim that toga posture, that slightly forward stoop from years of carrying heavy wool and acting respectable, was so iconic that statues were posed to replicate it, like marble caught mid-grumble. Outside again, you pass a sleepy baker setting dough for morning bread. Even in the quiet, work begins anew. A few early risers shuffle by, and you notice one wears a toga, pale, plain, but folded with care. Maybe he's a teacher, maybe just someone who likes tradition. You give a small nod. He returns it. As you approach your final turn, you pass a statue, one you've seen before but didn't linger near. A senator, robed in sculpted folds, his hand raised, his sinus frozen in mid-gesture. But tonight, in this hushed hour, you notice something else. A small chip at the hem. A missing piece, like a fold forgotten. It's oddly comforting. You circle back toward your resting place, that quiet inner courtyard where ivy climbs the walls and time seems to slow. You settle on a stone bench, gathering your toga around you. The fabric, imagined though it may be, holds warmth now, memory, mystery. The weight of emperors, comedians, philosophers, and tailors. Historians still argue whether the toga faded because it was impractical or simply because fashion, like empire, always moves forward. Some say it was replaced by the more comfortable dalmatica, others that it became too burdened by symbolism. Perhaps it just got too itchy. But maybe, just maybe, the toga did what it was always meant to do. It gave Rome something to wrap itself in while it dreamed.
Now, let's loosen those folds. Unfasten the fibula. Let the sinus slip gently from your shoulder. Let the wool unwind, not in shame, but in serenity. You lie back. The air hums faintly. The city softens. And the toga, once armor and theater and civic duty, becomes nothing more than a blanket again. So now you breathe slower. The folds of Rome fade into shadows, and all the bustling, bleached, and pleated layers melt away. You no longer carry the weight of statesmen, nor the itch of political ambition. The streets are quiet. The marble has cooled. Even the ever-muttering philosophers have gone still. You are just here, at rest. The toga that once wrapped around emperors and consuls and awkward first-time wearers now drapes softly around your thoughts, gentle as fog.
The edges no longer need perfect pleating. The umbo doesn't need adjustment. There's no crowd to impress, no senate to address, no pleb to outdress. Just you, floating somewhere between history and dream, wrapped not in wool, but in a long, slow exhale. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes close, maybe for the third or fourth time now. The echo of sandals fades, the chalk dust settles, Rome sleeps, and so can you.